They weren't just banned, they were buried. These cars were so extreme, so dangerous, or so far outside the rules that they were shut down before the public ever had a chance to know they existed. Built in secret, killed by law, or silenced by scandal, these machines vanished without a trace, and most people have never seen them. Here are 12 ultra-banned American cars you've never seen, and once you do, you'll understand why they had to disappear.
The 1970 Pontiac Firebird Pegasus concept is one of those shimmering what-could-have-been legends, an elegant ghost of an alternate timeline where Detroit and Modena shook hands and created something extraordinary. It wasn't a design study. It wasn't just a styling exercise. The Pegasus was a rolling, roaring prototype of pure ambition, Pontiac's bold, one-off vision of what an American automaker could do if it dared to build like the Europeans and dream like the Italians. It had a V12 heart, a European soul, and a body sculpted with the grace of a Ferrari Berlinetta. And then, like so many radical ideas of the time, it was buried. Built on a 1970 Firebird platform, the Pegasus was a hand-built aluminum-bodied Grand Tourer with unmistakable European inspiration. Its curvish lines echoed Ferrari's 365 GTB4 Daytona. The sloping hood, the long, flowing proportions, the tucked rear, all of it looked more at home outside the gates of Maranello than in any Pontiac dealership. This was not your average muscle car. It was a statement. Pontiac didn't just want to make powerful machines anymore. They wanted to make art. But the real surprise wasn't just skin deep. Underneath that sleek, hand-shaped bodywork lived a Ferrari-sourced 4.4-liter V12 engine. Yes, a real one, mated to a 5-speed manual gearbox. This wasn't a mocked-up design with fake pipes and fiberglass fantasy. It ran, it drove, it screamed. With 352 horsepower and a glorious 7,000 RPM redline, the Pegasus wasn't just a pretty face, it had the soul of a thoroughbred. GM engineers had imported a Ferrari 365 GTB4 and borrowed both its heart and its road manners. The chassis was tuned with European precision. The brakes, suspension, even the interior details were refined, elegant, and built with an attention to detail Pontiac had never shown before. It was a Firebird in name only. Everything else, the poise, the tone, the finesse, was pure European grand touring magic. But Pontiac was trapped in its own mythology. This was the era of GTOs, of Transams, of high-impact graphics and tire-smoking torque monsters. V8s were the language of Pontiac's customers. V12s were foreign, exotic, maybe even suspicious. Inside GM's executive towers, the idea of building a $10,000-plus aluminum-bodied Ferrari-powered Pontiac made people nervous. Who would buy it? Who would trust it? And worse, how would it fit into a dealership next to a Catalina or a Bonneville? The Pegasus was ultimately deemed too exotic for Pontiac's image, too refined, too European, too far from the world of shaker hoods and rally two wheels. There was no marketing plan, no production forecast, no dealer strategy. So GM did what GM always did with ideas that were too bold. They shelved it quietly, politely, forever. Only one Pegasus was ever built. It now resides in GM's Heritage Collection, a glimmering silver memory of the road not taken. Most people have never heard of it. Fewer have seen it, and almost no one has driven it. But that only adds to its legend. So, what if Pontiac had gone full Italian? What if they dared to break their own mold and challenge Ferrari on its own turf with a front-engine V12-powered GT car from America? Would it have succeeded? Maybe not in the short term, But it could have changed the conversation. It could have shown the world that American performance wasn't just about brute strength. It could also be about finesse, balance, and emotional design. And here's the more fascinating question. Would Ferrari have survived the 1970s as we know it? At the time, Ferrari was struggling. Sales were soft, emissions regulations were coming. Their cars were fast, but temperamental. Imagine a world where an American company had offered Ferrari-level performance with better dealer support, more reliability, and a price tag that undercut the Italians. Imagine what that would have done to Enzo's empire. The Pegasus wasn't just a missed opportunity for Pontiac. It was a glimpse into a parallel history where Detroit became not just the motor city, but the motor sport city, where the big three weren't afraid to think in 12 cylinders and aluminum panels, and a kid in Ohio might grow up dreaming of a Pontiac instead of a Ferrari. Today, the Pegasus remains a symbol, not just of Pontiac's ambition, but of GM's chronic fear of its own greatness. They had the pieces, they had the talent, they had the machine, and they let it go.
The 1969 Dodge Dart GTS 440 is one of those wild, muscle-bound experiments that makes you wonder what the engineers were drinking and how close we came to seeing something truly unhinged on showroom floors. It was the definition of too much engine in too small a car. A compact body stuffed with a hulking 440 cubic inch Magnum V8, an act of mechanical madness so front-heavy it nearly unbalanced the laws of physics. And yet, for a brief moment, Dodge was seriously considering selling it to the general public. On paper, it sounds glorious. Take the lightweight Dodge Dart, originally built to be an affordable, no-nonsense commuter, and cram Chrysler's most brutal big block under the hood. The 440 was a beast, a motor better suited to full-size B-bodies like the Charger or GTX, where its mass could be more evenly distributed. In the Dart, it turned the entire car into a fire-breathing, torque-spitting cannonball with no regard for balance, finesse, or practicality. This wasn't just a go-fast package, it was an act of controlled violence. The 440 Magnum made 375 horsepower and a monstrous 480 pound-feet of torque on paper. But anyone who's driven one knows those numbers were conservative. This engine could launch a big Mopar barge down the drag strip with ease. In the Dart, which weighed hundreds of pounds less, it turned quarter miles into a blur of smoke and noise. 0 to 60 happened in under 6 seconds if you could get traction, which honestly, you couldn't. This thing shredded tires like it was personal. Even at idle, it rumbled like it was daring the world to pick a fight. But here's the catch. Handling? What handling? The Dart was never designed to cope with that much mass over the front axle. The 440's sheer weight, over 700 pounds with iron heads and manifolds, turned the car into a nose-diving missile. Steering feel became theoretical. Corners weren't negotiated so much as survived. On a twisty road, the front end wanted to plow forward like a shopping cart full of bricks, and any attempt to correct mid-turn was met with groans from the overtaxed front suspension. The balance was so far off that early testers warned against spirited driving unless you had a death wish, or a straight road and no obstacles. Braking wasn't much better. The stock brakes were marginal for the job, and fade came quickly once the car gained momentum, which it did a lot. The engine would propel you to 100 miles per hour with ease, but the chassis had no business being along for the ride. And under hard deceleration, the nose would dive so severely that people joked you could scrape the front bumper on your own shadow. Still, Dodge built them. Not many, just a few dozen factory units as a proof of concept, and several more dealer-installed versions via the infamous M-code Rs. These were street legal in the loosest sense, but even the insurance companies knew something was wrong. Premiums were astronomical, and the NHRA, they weren't having it. The Dart 440s were banned from certain drag racing classes because they were simply too unfair, too fast for their class, too dangerous in the wrong hands of the driver. Dodge didn't care. This was the height of the horsepower wars, and Chrysler's direct connection program was all about flexing muscle. The Dart 440 was less about balance and more about brutality. It was a message. We can build something this crazy. What can you do? But the truth is, this car was never going to be practical or safe or even sustainable. The Dart's tight engine bay made even basic maintenance a chore. Spark plug changes were a knuckle-busting ordeal. Engine heat soaked into everything. Weight distribution was laughable, something like 60-40 or worse. And though some buyers loved the sheer madness of it, most people weren't ready to drive a car that behaved like a battering ram with loose steering. So Dodge stepped back. They never fully released the Dart GTS 440 to mass production. It remained a low-volume oddity, a factory freak born of ego, experimentation, and the relentless push for dominance on the drag strip. Today, these cars are incredibly rare and deeply collectible, not because they were good, but because they were so badass, so unhinged, so utterly unapologetic about their one-trick pony purpose. They weren't built to handle, they weren't built to stop. They were built to launch, to terrify, and to leave tire marks across the face of sanity. Have you ever driven something so nose-heavy it practically fell into corners? Dodge almost sold that to your dad. And in some alternate timeline, maybe they did.
The 1966 Ford Mustang station wagon might be one of the most tantalizing what-ifs in American automotive history. A long-roof unicorn that existed just long enough to spark endless debate, then vanished before it could change the game. Imagine it, the world's most iconic pony car transformed into a sleek Italian shooting brake, a Mustang with a hatch. It sounds like heresy. It sounds like genius. And depending on who you ask, it could have either ruined everything or elevated the Mustang into something timeless and untouchable. But yes, it was real. The idea was born not in Detroit, but in Europe, specifically Italy, where coach builders had long practiced the art of reimagining popular cars into exotic forms. Somewhere along the way, one such studio, often attributed to Intermeccanica, took a standard 1966 Mustang Coupe and stretched its roofline into a graceful fastback wagon, complete with a tailgate and rear glass that flowed beautifully into the Mustang's bold rear haunches. The result wasn't some clumsy, boxy compromise. It was elegant, balanced, and oddly seductive. A two-door rear-wheel drive Mustang wagon with all the muscle of its coupe sibling and all the utility of a grocery getter. It retained the Mustang's identity, but added a whole new dimension: practicality, rear seats that folded down, a cargo area big enough for suitcases, dogs, surfboards, or band gear. And yet, it still had the long hood, short deck, galloping pony on the grill, and that unmistakable Mustang profile. So what happened? Why didn't it make it? Because Ford panicked. The Mustang at that time was a sacred brand, less than 2 years old and already shattering every sales record in the book. It was youth, rebellion, performance, sex appeal. It was freedom on four wheels. And someone at Ford headquarters looked at that shooting brake design and thought, a station wagon for this car? That's going to kill the magic. From a marketing standpoint, it made twisted sense. Wagons were for moms, for families, for responsibility and restraint. The Mustang, by contrast, was a symbol of getting away from all that. Ford executives feared that a wagon variant, even as beautiful and European as this, would water down the image, tarnish the brand, and confuse the public. Mustang was an emotion, not a configuration. So the prototype was quietly buried, the tooling never built,
and the wagon quietly became a footnote in Mustang lore. But what if they'd had the guts? What if Ford had leaned into the idea of a Mustang wagon instead of fearing it? What if they'd offered buyers a car that could go toe-to-toe with European shooting brakes, combining American muscle with Italian flair and actual usable utility? It might have changed everything. The Mustang could have expanded its identity beyond the coupe and convertible, reaching new buyers who needed practicality but still wanted flair. It could have outflanked rivals like the Camaro and Firebird with a level of versatility they never dared approach. Imagine a Boss 302 wagon, a Shelby GT35 shooting brake, a family car that could hit 60 in under 6 seconds and haul a weekend's worth of camping gear. Would that have ruined the Mustang's legend? Or would it have made it immortal? Instead, Ford played it safe. The Mustang wagon never happened, and for decades it remained a whisper, a photo in an old European magazine, a dusty prototype in a garage, a dream that collectors and designers occasionally resurrect with custom builds. And now, in a world filled with performance SUVs, lifted crossovers, and turbocharged wagons with 500-plus horsepower, the idea seems ahead of its time. The Mustang wagon wasn't a joke. It was a prophecy, a glimpse into a world where utility and style didn't have to be enemies. So here's the real question. Would you have driven it? Would you have parked that long-roof Mustang in your driveway and felt proud or embarrassed? Because maybe the Mustang wagon wasn't a betrayal of the brand. Maybe it was an evolution that came too early. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was just too bold for 1966.
The 1977 Chevrolet Corvette Arovet stands as one of the most fascinating and overlooked milestones in Corvette and American sports car history. Decades before the world marveled at the C8's revolutionary mid-engine layout, GM was already pushing the envelope with the Arovet, a bold concept that blended radical design, cutting-edge engineering, and pure American ambition. This car wasn't just a futuristic prototype. It was a near-production-ready mid-engine V8 supercar that dared to challenge European titans long before Detroit was ready to embrace such a shift. Yet despite its undeniable potential, the Arovet was shelved, labeled too risky and too costly, and the dream of a mid-engine Corvette had to wait nearly 40 years to finally arrive. The Arovet began life in the early 1970s as an audacious experiment, transplanting a potent small-block V8 behind the seats into a sleek aerodynamic body, complete with a flip-forward canopy inspired by fighter jets and gull-wing doors that screamed science fiction. The cockpit was unlike anything Chevrolet had ever built, a wraparound glass canopy that merged windshield and roof in one seamless piece, offering panoramic views and a jet fighter vibe. The bodywork was sculpted for aerodynamics, with smooth curves and aggressive scoops feeding the mid-mounted engine and cooling systems. Underneath that exotic exterior was a mid-engine layout with the iconic 350 cubic inch V8 pushing around 370 horsepower. Unlike the traditional front-engine Corvette, this setup promised improved weight distribution, superior handling, and a more balanced driving experience, something American sports cars had long struggled to perfect against nimble European rivals. Engineers believe the Arovet could outperform the Ferrari 308 and Porsche 911 in corners while delivering classic V8 American grunt. Performance aside, the Arovet's design was daring. The gull-wing doors added drama and flair, but also complexity. The glass canopy, while visually stunning, posed challenges for driver ingress, egress, and climate control. Manufacturing such a car at scale would require significant investment in new tooling, materials, and assembly techniques, at a time when the U.S. auto industry was battling emissions regulations, rising costs, and economic uncertainty. GM executives faced a dilemma. On one hand, the Arovet embodied everything a Corvette should be: performance, innovation, and excitement.
On the other hand, it represented a gamble that could alienate traditional buyers, strain production budgets, and risk falling short in an increasingly competitive market. The mid-1970s also saw tightening safety and emissions regulations that threatened to stifle high-performance cars altogether. Ultimately, cost and market uncertainty won out. GM shelved the Arovet project in favor of evolving the front-engine Corvette platform through the late 1970s and 80s. The dream of a mid-engine Corvette was postponed for decades, leaving Ferrari and other European marques unchallenged in that space. Only with the release of the C8 in 2020 did Chevrolet finally realize the vision the Arovet had promised half a century earlier. So what if the Corvette had gone mid-engine in the 70s? Could it have beaten Ferrari to the future? Could Detroit's muscle and innovation have changed the trajectory of exotic sports cars forever? It's tantalizing to imagine a world where the Corvette Arovet, raw, American, and fearless, led the charge in mid-engine performance, forcing Ferrari to rethink its dominance and changing the expectations for American sports cars worldwide. Maybe the exotic car market would have shifted earlier, making mid-engine layout the standard decades before it actually did. But more than that, the Arovet serves as a symbol of innovation held back by caution. A reminder that sometimes the future is within reach, but the risk just feels too big. If only GM had the guts to follow through, the mid-engine Corvette might have rewritten automotive history. Instead, it waits in museums and collector garages as a beautiful what could have been, an icon of ambition and near-miss greatness that still inspires Corvette fans and car enthusiasts around the world.
The 1970 Plymouth Duster 340 AAR prototype is one of the great lost legends of American motorsport. A what-if missile built in the shadows, test-fired in secrecy, and then quietly silenced before it ever had the chance to light up a track. It was the little brother that never got to grow up. While the spotlight shined on the AAR CUDA in the Trans Am Wars, the Duster 340 AAR was in development just behind the curtain, a purpose-built racer, lighter, simpler, and arguably more radical than its E-body sibling. But the project was killed before the world ever knew it existed. Why? Because even in the golden age of muscle, some names were seen as too cheap to race. And that's the tragic truth of the Duster AAR. It wasn't a failure, it was a victim of branding. Let's rewind to 1970. Trans Am racing was the hottest ticket in American performance. Every major manufacturer was involved. Chevrolet with the Camaro Z28, Ford with the Boss 302 Mustang, AMC with the Javelin, and Mopar with its newly launched AAR CUDA. That car was built under the watchful eye of Dan Gurney's All-American Racers, or AAR, and it was purpose-built to meet homologation rules. Fiberglass hood, side exit exhausts, aggressive stance, and a hot 340 small block with triple two-barrel carbs. But in the wings, Plymouth engineers had another idea: build a similar car using the compact, featherweight Duster platform. The Duster was smaller, lighter, and cheaper than the CUDA. It had a short wheelbase, minimalist body, and massive performance potential when paired with a 275 horsepower 340 V8. So someone in the back rooms of Chrysler said, what if we went full Trans Am with this one too? What followed was a secret Skunk Works prototype that stripped the Duster down to its bones and rebuilt it for war. Fiberglass fenders and hood, flared wheel arches, lightweight bumpers, a lowered ride height and track-tuned suspension, side exit exhausts like its AAR cousin, and under the hood, a blueprinted 340 with a custom intake and high-lift cam. Possibly even tri-carb setups in some test mules, though those details were scrubbed from official memory. This car wasn't built for cruising Woodward, it was built for Laguna Seca, for Riverside, for SCCA domination. It weighed less than the AAR CUDA, it had tighter dimensions, it had potential. But it had one fatal flaw. It was a Duster. The Duster name was budget, it was economy. It was the high schooler's muscle car, the one your older brother bought with leftover graduation money. Chrysler brass didn't believe people would take it seriously as a race car. They worried it would dilute the image of the more expensive, more marketable CUDA and Challenger lines. Worse, they feared that racing a Duster might send the wrong message, making the cheaper car look faster or better than the flagship E-bodies. So they shut it down. The Duster AAR prototype, this lightweight, road course killer, was parked, stripped, and likely scrapped. No public photos, no press releases, no chance for the public to even see what it could have been. The project vanished into corporate silence. Even many Mopar insiders didn't know it existed until years later, when whispers and documents surfaced from deep inside Chrysler's archives. Could the Duster AAR have changed the game? Absolutely. Imagine a Trans Am field where the Duster lined up against the Boss 302, the Z28, and the Javelin, and held its own. Imagine a street version, with side pipes and a fiberglass hood terrorizing your local streets for a fraction of the price of a Coupe. It could have redefined Plymouth's performance image, not just brute force power, but agile, affordable racing precision. But it wasn't allowed, because in the end, no matter how fast it was or how good it could have been, the Duster was still too poor for performance in the eyes of the people holding the checkbook. And so, the dream died before it even made the brochure. Today, the 1970 Duster 340 AAR remains a ghost, an idea crushed under the weight of branding, class perception, and corporate ego. But for those who know, it's a symbol of what might have been. Not every legend is born from victory. Some are born from silence and from what we never got to see.
The 1965 Buick Skylark GS prototype, equipped with the formidable 401 Nailhead V8, represents one of those fascinating what-if moments in muscle car history, where raw power collided head-on with engineering realities, and a manufacturer was forced to confront the limits of its own creation. Before the official launch of the GS 400, Buick engineers were pushing boundaries, trying to bolt their mighty 401 cubic inch nailhead engine, famous for its crushing torque and distinctive nailhead design, into the Skylark's mid-size coupe chassis. Their vision was to create a family-oriented muscle car that packed an unexpected punch, combining Buick's refined luxury pedigree with street-ripping grunt. But this quest for power quickly turned into a lesson in automotive physics and structural integrity, one that ended with GM halting production before the public ever got to experience this powerhouse. At its core, the 401 Nailhead was a torque monster. Buick's big block engine was renowned not for high rev horsepower, but for relentless low-end muscle and a thick, thunderous exhaust note. It produced roughly 325 horsepower, but more impressively, a staggering 445 pound-feet of torque that would shove the driver deep into the seat with every throttle application. This wasn't an engine designed to scream at high RPMs. It was a grinding, forceful V8 that excelled in heavier Buick sedans and big personal luxury cars, where smooth, effortless power delivery was king. So, fitting this engine into the Skylark GS made sense on paper. Buick wanted to shake up the mid-size muscle car market by offering a car that could annihilate stoplights and blast down drag strips while still being comfortable enough for a family road trip. The Skylark GS's stylish coupe design was sleek and sporty, and the idea of pairing it with the Nailhead's raw grunt was tantalizing. In test drives, the car exhibited blistering straight-line performance that rivaled many contemporaries with larger displacement motors. However, the enthusiasm quickly met hard reality during GM's rigorous durability and handling tests. The Skylark GS platform was originally engineered around smaller, lighter engines. Its unibody construction and subframe components were designed with a certain weight distribution and stress tolerance in mind. When engineers shoved the heavy 401 Nailhead under the hood, the scales tipped drastically. The engine's immense mass, especially heavy in the front, put enormous strain on the frame rails, suspension mounts, and steering components. During durability testing, cracks began to appear in the frame rails, a red flag that the chassis wasn't coping with the added torque and weight. Suspension components fatigued prematurely, leading to alignment issues and inconsistent handling. Drivers and engineers alike reported that the car's front end felt unwieldy, prone to understeer, and difficult to control in tight corners. The massive torque output aggravated wheel hop during launches, making traction a constant battle and safety a growing concern. The problem wasn't just performance, it was safety and reliability. GM's testing engineers realized that prolonged street or track use could lead to catastrophic failures. Frame cracks could worsen, suspension parts could break, and steering could become dangerously imprecise. This wasn't a case of a car that needed tweaks or suspension upgrades. The fundamental architecture simply couldn't contain the brute force of the 401 nailhead. Faced with this sobering reality, GM's management and engineering teams took a hard stance. Rather than risking a public relations nightmare, or worse, accidents caused by structural failures, they banned the 401 nailhead engine from the Skylark GS production lineup. Buick instead directed their efforts toward the smaller, lighter, and more balanced 400 cubic inch V8 that debuted as the GS 400. The 400 offered a more manageable 340 to 350 horsepower with better reliability and handling characteristics. It was a compromise that ultimately preserved the Skylark's reputation and safety without sacrificing too much performance. The story of the 1965 Buick Skylark GS 401 prototype became a powerful reminder to the muscle car world. Raw horsepower numbers are exciting, but they must be matched by a chassis and suspension that can handle the load. The car isn't just about the engine, it's a system, a balance between power, weight, and control. Buick learned that lesson the hard way. For enthusiasts, the Skylark GS 401 prototype stands as a tantalizing glimpse into a muscle car that could have been, a brutal acceleration offering torque-heavy bruiser that wrapped American V8 character in mid-size luxury. But it was also a symbol of the limits that muscle cars must respect, even in their wildest dreams. So, how strong is too strong for a family coupe? Buick found out the answer with this car. When the engine's torque tears apart the very frame that holds it, it's simply too strong. The 1965 Buick Skylark GS 401 prototype is a testament to ambition, engineering challenges, and the delicate dance between power and practicality, reminding us that muscle cars are only as great as the harmony between their parts.
The 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W50 prototype, fitted with a Wankel rotary engine, stands out as one of the most intriguing and unconventional experiments in muscle car history. A bold venture into uncharted territory that challenged everything enthusiasts thought they knew about what a muscle car should sound, feel, and perform like. At a time when the muscle car era was reaching its peak, with thunderous big block V8s defining the raw power and personality of American performance cars, Oldsmobile dared to push the boundaries by fitting its legendary 442 with a tiny, high-revving rotary engine. What emerged was a machine that buzzed and whined instead of roaring, a car whose very soul was at odds with the tradition it sought to uphold, and a project that would be quietly buried under the weight of practicality, regulations, and fan expectations. The Wankel rotary engine was a radical departure from the piston-driven V8s that powered most muscle cars of the time. Developed in Germany and perfected by Mazda, the rotary engine used a triangular rotor spinning inside an oval chamber, producing power with fewer moving parts and a smooth, high-revving character that was almost whisper-quiet compared to the thunderous V8s. It promised advantages in weight and compactness, which engineers hoped could translate into better handling and a fresh performance profile for the 442. Oldsmobile's idea was both visionary and risky. Could the 442 shed its traditional big block grunt and instead embrace a futuristic, compact power plant while retaining the performance and spirit that made the car an icon? The W50 prototype was equipped with a tuned rotary engine designed to deliver spirited power and a new kind of driving experience, with quick revving excitement replacing the brute force torque of a V8. The car's chassis and suspension were adapted to complement this different powertrain, aiming to craft a muscle car that was agile, nimble, and ahead of its time. However, the experiment quickly ran into major obstacles.
first, the rotary engine's unique sound, a high-pitched buzzing and whining, was alien to muscle car fans accustomed to deep rumbles and guttural V8 roars. This alone raised questions about whether the car could ever be embraced by the traditional muscle car audience, who valued not just performance, but the visceral sensory experience of a roaring V8. More critically, the rotary engine was plagued by mechanical fragility. It suffered from issues like rotor seal wear, overheating, and difficulty in maintaining long-term reliability under heavy use. The early 1970s also saw tightening emissions regulations in the US, and the rotary engine's combustion characteristics made it notoriously difficult to control pollutants and meet federal standards. Oldsmobile engineers faced steep technical challenges and costly redesigns to try to bring the rotary in line with emissions laws, efforts that drained resources and time. Meanwhile, the market was shifting. Muscle cars were already under pressure from insurance hikes, rising fuel prices, and increasing government restrictions. Introducing a radically different engine with uncertain reliability and an unfamiliar noise signature seemed commercially risky. Ultimately, Oldsmobile's leadership chose to quietly cancel the Wankel Rotary 442 project, deciding that the car's futuristic promise could not outweigh its practical shortcomings and the expectations of their core customers. The Rotary 442 thus became a ghost in muscle car history, an ambitious prototype that dared to rewrite the muscle car playbook, but was silenced before it could roar or buzz its way into production. It challenges us to imagine an alternate muscle car world, one where the signature thunder of American V8s was replaced by the smooth, high-pitched whine of spinning rotors. Could the muscle car have evolved into something lighter, more refined, and more technically advanced? Or was the roar and torque of a big block V8 an essential part of the muscle car's soul, impossible to replace? Today, the 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W50 rotary prototype stands as a fascinating what-if, a symbol of innovation clashing with tradition. It reminds us that muscle cars are more than just power and speed. They are cultural icons tied to sound, feel, and emotion. The Wankel 442's buzzing engine may never have been the lion's roar muscle car fans crave, but it remains a testament to a time when engineers dared to dream differently, even if the world wasn't ready to listen.
The 1973 Mercury Comet GT 429 Super Cobra Jet prototype is the kind of car that makes muscle car fanatics stop mid-sentence, take a long breath, and say, "Wait, that existed?" On paper, it sounds like an urban legend, a compact, economy-based coupe stuffed with one of the most fearsome engines Ford ever built, the 429 Super Cobra Jet, a racing-grade big-block V8 known for shaking windows and demolishing quarter-mile records. But the story is true. Ford's engineers did it. They took the mild-mannered Mercury Comet GT, a car better known for budget transportation than performance glory, and transformed it into a snarling, pavement-ripping monster that could reportedly outrun even the mighty Boss 429 Mustang. And then, before the world ever got a chance to hear it roar at a dealership, Ford silenced it. Why? Because it was too fast, too risky, and way too wild for the legal, economic, and political realities of 1973. To understand how insane this prototype really was, you have to start with the engine, the 429 Super Cobra Jet. This was Ford's top-tier big block in the early 70s. Forged internals, solid lifter camshafts, huge breathing heads, and horsepower numbers that were deliberately underrated on paper, but terrifyingly real at the track. It was the heart of Ford's factory drag cars and NASCAR machines. In a Boss 429 Mustang, it was already a handful, but in the smaller, lighter Comet GT, that was uncharted territory. The test mules that Ford's internal teams developed showed brutal straight-line performance. The Comet GT 429 SCJ had enough torque to shred tires into smoke at will, and the quarter-mile times reportedly dipped into territory that rivaled Hemis and Coupe Camaros. But it wasn't just fast. It was invisible. The Comet GT looked almost tame, with its humble lines and compact body. It didn't wear wild stripes or shout about its capabilities. That made it a true sleeper killer, a street weapon that could roll up next to you at a light and annihilate your ego without ever raising its voice. And yet, despite its jaw-dropping potential, the car never reached production. Why? First, 1973 was a turning point. Insurance companies were cracking down hard on high-performance vehicles, especially ones that blended big engines with small bodies. Young buyers, the exact target market for a Comet GT 429, were being priced out of their own cars due to skyrocketing insurance premiums. A car like this would have been nearly impossible to insure legally without hiding the engine swap. Second, crash safety concerns loomed large. The Comet wasn't engineered to handle the weight and violence of a monster like the 429 SCJ. Ford's own crash simulations showed structural concerns, especially with front-end weight bias and braking limitations. In short, the car was too fast for its own good, a barely contained missile without the safety net to match its speed. And finally, Ford was nervous. Nervous that this budget supercar would eat into Mustang sales. Nervous that it might earn the wrong kind of attention from regulators. Nervous that unleashing it might hurt the brand more than help it in the post-muscle era of emissions, safety, and economic uncertainty. So, the project was buried. No ads, no press, no warning. The prototype was shelved, the records buried, and the public was never supposed to know. But word leaked out, as it always does in the muscle car underground. Whispers of that Comet that beat the Boss 429 circulated in garages, swap meets, and drag strips for decades. Was it real? Was it street legal? Did one survive? Nobody knows for sure. But the idea of the 1973 Mercury Comet GT 429 SCJ lives on as a symbol of forbidden performance, a true sleeper that could have redefined the muscle car's final moments before the gas crisis shut the whole party down. So, if you had one, this secret weapon, this forgotten missile, where would you take it? Cars and coffee to blow some minds, or the drag strip where it belongs, ripping silently down the lanes until the crowd realizes what just happened? Either way, it'd be the kind of car you don't park. You unleash it and watch everyone's jaws drop when the badge says Comet, but the taillights are long gone.
The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Grand Sport Coupe is one of the most legendary and tantalizing what-if stories in American automotive history. A story of raw ambition, cutting-edge engineering, and a corporate hand that slammed the brakes on a potential racing dynasty before it could even begin. Only 5 of these lightweight, aerodynamic monsters were ever built, and yet their impact on the muscle car and racing world remains monumental, largely because they were so fiercely banned by General Motors itself. The Grand Sport was born to race, engineered to crush European legends like Ferrari on the track, but instead it was silenced before the checkered flag could wave. What makes this story so compelling is the duality. Here was possibly the greatest Corvette ever built, a car with the soul of a true racing champion, yet one you could never buy, race, or even officially own. GM's anti-racing policy of the early 1960s was famously strict. While the Corvette nameplate was tied deeply to motorsport heritage, the company feared the legal and financial risks of factory-backed racing. The Grand Sport program, spearheaded by the legendary Zora Arkus Duntov, was conceived as a response to European dominance in sports car racing. These 5 coupe-bodied cars were stripped down, lightweight, and packed with race-ready 377 cubic-inch small-block V8 engines, producing over 550 horsepower, a mind-blowing figure for the time. Every ounce of weight was shaved. The chassis was reinforced with a roll cage. The body was reshaped for aerodynamic efficiency. The The brakes and suspension were beefed up for brutal racing conditions. On paper and in private testing, the Grand Sports were jaw-dropping. They could out-accelerate, out-handle, and out-brake the finest European race cars, including the Ferrari 250 GTO, which had dominated the racing world. Drivers reported the Grand Sport's raw speed and nimble handling made it a legitimate contender for international racing glory. The technology, engineering, and driver feedback coming from these prototypes laid groundwork that would influence Corvette's future performance direction. But just as the Grand Sport was poised to step onto the world's biggest racing stages, GM executives abruptly pulled the plug. They feared that factory involvement in racing would expose the company to liability if drivers were hurt, invite negative press, or upset conservative shareholders. Despite Zora Arkus Duntop's passionate pleas, the company's legal department enforced a strict ban on any factory support or direct racing involvement. The Grand Sports were decommissioned, their racing aspirations crushed before they could race. The 5 cars were eventually sold off to private teams, some modified further, some lost to history. Yet the legend of the 1963 Corvette Grand Sport Coupe lives on as a symbol of what might have been. A purebred American race car that could have redefined Corvette's image decades earlier, challenging the best in the world on equal footing. Enthusiasts and historians often debate, was this the greatest Corvette ever built? Its combination of lightweight design, raw horsepower, and race-ready engineering certainly makes a strong case. But the tragedy is that you could never buy one new, never take it to the track with factory support, never fully experience its potential as Chevrolet intended. The Grand Sport remains rare gem in Corvette lore, an elusive promise of American racing dominance cut short by corporate caution. It embodies the eternal question of muscle car history. How much more could have been achieved if ambition had met opportunity instead of resistance? So, was the 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Grand Sport Coupe the greatest Corvette ever built? For many, it remains a legend defined as much by its untapped promise and near-mythical status as by the brief flashes of brilliance it showed. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest machines are the ones that never get their chance to roar.
The 1972 AMC Javelin Rumbler concept wasn't just a car. It was a last, furious scream into the void from a company that had nothing left to lose. While the big 3 automakers were pulling back from high-performance offerings and choking their muscle cars to meet rising emission standards and insurance pressures, AMC, always the underdog, built a machine so aggressive, so radically unhinged, that it looked like something ripped from the pages of a post-apocalyptic comic book. The Rumbler was AMC's Mad Max moment before Mad Max was even a thing. A wild, one-off prototype that snarled at convention and made no apologies for its lunacy. And just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Only one was made, and like so many daring projects in AMC's troubled history, it was scrapped before it ever stood a chance. The idea behind the Rumbler was born during AMC's brief moment of swagger. The company had just won the Trans Am Championship with the Javelin under the direction of Roger Penske and Mark Donohue. The Javelin, AMC's answer to the Mustang and Camaro, had finally earned some respect on the track. But the writing was already on the wall. Muscle cars were dying. The oil crisis hadn't even hit yet, but insurance companies were already waging war on high-horsepower machines. Emissions rules were tightening year by year, and buyers were shifting toward economy and safety. The muscle car was becoming a dinosaur, and AMC, which never had the deep pockets of GM or Ford, couldn't afford many missteps. And yet, somebody at AMC said, "Let's go bigger," and the Rumbler was the result. At first glance, the Rumbler looked like a Javelin on steroids, and then some. It was fitted with massive bolt-on fender flares that could have swallowed entire neighborhoods. These weren't aesthetic flourishes, they were designed to house enormous racing slicks. The side exit exhaust pipes shot straight out below the rocker panels, designed not for quiet cruising, but for volume, violence, and raw spectacle.
The front and rear fascias were custom sculpted, and the stance was slammed so low and wide it looked like it wanted to punch the ground. This car didn't whisper performance, it screamed it. Mechanically, it was even more intense. Though exact records are scarce, another victim of AMC's habit of burying its wildest experiments, it's believed that the Rumbler packed a heavily modified version of AMC's 401 cubic inch V8. But this wasn't your uncle's Matador engine. This version was built for brutal drag strip-ready torque. Rumors from engineers and those who saw the car firsthand say it could have made well over 450 horsepower, possibly more, depending on tuning. Paired with a beefed-up transmission and a chassis setup not designed for comfort, the Rumbler was said to be borderline undrivable on the street, but devastating on the strip. It didn't handle like a sports car. It wasn't meant to. It was AMC's middle finger to subtlety, refinement, and restraint. But there was one problem. It came too late. By 1972, AMC was already bleeding money. They were spending big on advertising, trying to move volume with budget-friendly compacts like the Gremlin and Hornet. Performance cars didn't sell like they used to. And when the Rumbler was shown, quietly, at a SEMA display and in a few insider circles, AMC executives reportedly saw it not as a savior, but as a liability. It was too loud, too expensive to mass produce, too wild for the tightening regulations, too unhinged for a company trying to look stable. And so, after one prototype, the Rumbler was killed. The only known example was either dismantled or scrapped, as was often AMC's fate with outlandish concepts. No Rumbler ever hit the showroom. No press photos were widely released, no marketing campaign ever made it to the drawing board. It was erased, like a dangerous idea someone regretted having too late. But what if they had built it? What if AMC had doubled down on their image as the muscle car outlaw, the scrappy, unpredictable brand that built cars for the fringe? What if the Rumbler had gone into limited production and become a cult icon? Could it have helped AMC carve out a niche as the last true rebel in a world of neutered 70s performance? Could it have given them the edge, the identity, the fire to survive the decade on something more than economy cars and Renault partnerships? We'll never know. But we do know this. The 1972 AMC Javelin Rumbler concept was not built to be remembered quietly. It was loud, fast, brutal, and dangerous. It was AMC's wild one-shot experiment, a car that dared to scream when the rest of the world was going silent. And even though it's gone, long scrapped and forgotten by all but the most devoted fans, its legend lives on. In a world that was starting to choose safety over speed, efficiency over excitement, and conformity over chaos, the Rumbler was the last gasp of madness. And what a beautiful gasp it was.
The 1964 Ford Thunderbolt Convertible is one of the strangest, most compelling contradictions in American muscle car history. A machine so powerful, so purpose-built, and so utterly unsuited to its own configuration that it became, quite literally, a paradox on wheels. Just the words Thunderbolt Convertible sound like a myth, like something you'd hear in a drag racer's fever dream. After all, the original Thunderbolt Coupe was already pushing the limits of legality. It was Ford's factory drag strip assassin, a bare-bones Fairlane shell stuffed with a race-prepped 427 cubic inch V8, fiberglass panels, no sound deadening, no radio, and in some cases, no passenger seat. It was fast, brutal, twitchy, and barely street legal even in its most conservative form. So why, in the middle of this fire-breathing madness, did someone at Ford greenlight a convertible? That's the mystery and the legend. Only one Thunderbolt convertible was ever built, and its creation wasn't a marketing stunt or a dealer option. It was an internal experiment, something conjured up in the performance labs at Ford to see what the ultimate no-compromise Thunderbolt could look like if taken to its most extreme and, frankly, most illogical form. The thinking might have been, if the Coupe could dominate NHRA superstock, what could be done with a lighter roof and more airflow? But that logic, while technically bold, quickly unraveled in reality. The Thunderbolt's 427 engine was infamous for its violent torque and savage acceleration. Drop that powertrain into a lightweight, Fairlane convertible body, which lacked the rigidity of a hardtop, and you get chaos. The unibody structure flexed so violently under throttle that it compromised handling, stability, and overall safety. Twist the chassis too hard and the doors wouldn't even open or close properly. The rear axle would hop like a jackrabbit, and body panels could misalign under power. In other words, it was faster than the car could physically contain. The engineers quickly realized they had created a monster that was borderline undrivable under real-world conditions. At best, it was an engineering curiosity. At worst, it was a lawsuit waiting to happen. A car so fast and so soft-top that it defied logic and legality in the same breath. Emissions rules didn't matter. Safety standards weren't yet codified for high-speed convertibles, but the car simply couldn't be trusted. Not on public roads, and not even on the track without major reinforcement that would defeat the point of the convertible in the first place. Ford made the call to mothball the project. The lone convertible Thunderbolt prototype, depending on which version of the story you hear, was either scrapped quietly in Dearborn or tucked away and sold off to a private collector under a veil of silence. Either way, it was never officially acknowledged in Ford marketing, never raced, and never offered to the public. Its existence remained an open secret among a small circle of Ford historians and muscle car diehards. And yet, for muscle car purists, the idea of the Thunderbolt convertible is almost poetic. It represents the absolute edge of 1960s American performance lunacy, a car designed not for balance or safety, but for the singular goal of unfiltered speed. In that context, a convertible version makes a kind of mad sense. The most powerful engine Ford had, the lightest body possible, and the least structural integrity imaginable. It's like putting a dragster engine in a go-kart. Terrifying, exhilarating, and completely irresponsible. So can a car be so fast and so soft-top that it becomes a legal paradox? The Thunderbolt convertible proves that yes, it can. It was a machine that couldn't be sold, couldn't be raced safely, and couldn't even be classified by normal standards. It was too fast for its own frame, too rare to be remembered properly, and too dangerous to survive in the open. And that's why, even though only one ever existed, and even though most people have never seen a photo, it remains one of the most mysterious, provocative cars ever built in the golden age of American muscle. It was the muscle car taken to its illogical conclusion. And for that reason alone, it will never be forgotten.
The 1984 Chrysler Laser XE Turbo AWD concept might be one of the most tragic what-could-have-been moments in American performance car history. A prototype that could have rewritten the rules and carved Chrysler's name alongside the great rally legends. At first glance, the Laser was Chrysler's attempt at a sporty, front-wheel drive coupe based on the K-Car platform, a sharp-looking sibling to the Dodge Daytona, aimed more at styling-conscious buyers than speed freaks. But beneath the surface, engineers were toying with something radical. A turbocharged, all-wheel drive version designed not just to compete on American streets, but to challenge Europe's AWD elite, particularly the Audi Quattro that was busy redefining rally racing and performance handling in the early 1980s. The plan was ambitious. The AWD system Chrysler was developing would have distributed power more effectively than any American front driver of its time, while the turbocharged 2.2-liter engine, already being refined in Shelby's performance programs, could be dialed up to output impressive horsepower numbers in a lightweight chassis. The XE Turbo AWD concept was a proof-of-concept vehicle that hinted at Chrysler's hope to join a whole new performance category, rally-inspired, turbocharged, all-weather grip machines, a segment that was only just emerging globally. But the Laser AWD never made it past the prototype stage. Why? Because the very things that made it exciting, turbocharging, all-wheel drive, bespoke engineering, were also its undoing. Chrysler's corporate realities in 1984 were harsh. While the K-Car platform had saved the company from financial collapse, Chrysler was still cautious about taking expensive risks. The AWD system, which was cobbled together from early developmental parts and would have required completely new production tooling, proved too costly. Worse, internal tests revealed significant reliability issues with the drivetrain.
Turbo lag, heat management problems, and AWD complexity made the car fragile under stress. And with Chrysler already struggling with warranty claims on lesser turbo cars, adding all-wheel drive seemed like a dangerous escalation. There were also marketing doubts. The American public didn't fully understand AWD as a performance benefit yet, especially not in a coupe. Audi's Quattro was still exotic and relatively unknown outside of rally fans and a few European enthusiasts. Chrysler execs feared buyers wouldn't pay extra for technology they didn't understand in a car brand that wasn't known for racing heritage. The Laser was already fighting an uphill battle to be taken seriously next to the Camaro and Mustang. Adding a high-cost, high-risk AWD turbo version just didn't make sense to the boardroom. And so, it was buried. The single prototype Laser XE Turbo AWD was never shown to the public. It became a test-bed footnote, a curious relic in Chrysler's engineering archives. No fanfare, no magazine spreads, no rally car ambitions, just one fast, forgotten machine parked in a warehouse before being scrapped or dismantled for parts. But now in hindsight, we're left to wonder, could this have been America's answer to the Audi Quattro? Could Chrysler have beaten Subaru and Mitsubishi to the punch with an AWD turbo coupe before rally-style street cars became a global phenomenon in the 1990s? Could this Laser have evolved into something like an American WRX or Lancer Evo? It's hard not to imagine what might have happened if Chrysler had taken the leap. With Shelby already tweaking the front-drive versions of the Laser in Daytona, the foundation was there. Had Chrysler embraced AWD development and built a brand identity around it early, they might have carved a niche, especially with snowbelt drivers craving performance and traction. But they didn't. And so, the 1984 Chrysler Laser XE Turbo AWD concept remains a fleeting moment in time, the ghost of an American rally hero that never was. A car with the heart of a turbocharged fighter and the drivetrain of a legend, but no chance to prove itself. It wasn't just a missed opportunity for Chrysler. It was a missed opportunity for the American performance world altogether. A shot at rewriting history that never made it out of the lab.